At midnight, the fire chose what to destroy, and what to leave behind. From the ruins, a letter surfaced. Sealed. Untouched. Addressed to a man who thought his story had ended long ago. But hidden inside was a secret that had waited 20 years to strike, one truth so shattering, it would tear apart everything he built to survive. And when he finally opened it, he realized the fire wasn't the real warning. The real danger was still alive. And it was waiting for him. But before we begin, write in the comments where you're from. I'm curious to see how far these stories can travel. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new captivating tales. Let's begin. Franklin Morrow had spent the better part of his life building fences, and not just the kind that lined pastures and kept the cattle in. No, these were the kind a man built in his heart, tall, silent, meant to last through storms. Folks in town said he had concrete in his soul and barbed wire for a spine. He'd been a Marine, a welder, a father, and, for the last 20 years, a man who didn't flinch when someone mentioned the name Clayton. Clayton was his boy. Clayton was also the man who tried to kill him. It had happened one night in '03, after a 4th of July party turned sour. Franklin had said something, no one remembered what, and the next thing they knew, the boy was on him with a broken beer bottle and blood in his eyes. The scar on Franklin's neck ran deep, but not as deep as the wound in his chest the day the judge banged the gavel and sentenced his son to life. Franklin didn't testify. He didn't need to. The world had already decided, Clayton Morrow was a lost cause. So Franklin did what he did best. He built another fence. This one higher than all the rest. And for 20 years, he never crossed it. But something changed the day the farmhouse caught fire. Franklin hadn't lived there in decades, not since his wife passed and he moved into a trailer near the edge of Smith County. But the place had stayed in the family. Empty, boarded up, haunted only by termites and whispers. So when he got the call from the sheriff, said someone broke in, lit the place up, and damn near burned it to the ground, Franklin barely said a word. He just got in his truck and drove. It was the letter that did it. The sheriff handed it to him in a plastic evidence bag like it was a grenade someone forgot to pull the pin from. It was brittle, scorched at the corners, but still sealed. Franklin turned it over once, twice, reading the name printed in black ink that had survived the heat like it had been waiting to be found. To Franklin Morrow, from Clayton. Now, understand this, Franklin hadn't opened anything from his son in over 20 years. Prison mail came, and he burned it. Every single one. Didn't read a word. Didn't care. Or so he told himself. But this letter, it wouldn't burn. And that, somehow, meant something. So he took it home. Sat down at the little kitchen table where he ate his dinners alone. Stared at it like it might start screaming. And then he opened it. There were 5 words, handwritten in that same jagged scrawl from all those years ago. 5 words that cracked something in Franklin's chest like a sledgehammer hitting glass. He wasn't who you thought. No signature. No date. Just that line. Franklin didn't sleep that night. He paced. He drank. He sat on the porch with his shotgun across his knees like the old days, when he thought the devil came in through the front door. But this wasn't the devil. This was something worse. It was a question. He drove to the prison the next morning. No call. No warning. Just drove. It was 6 hours through winding back roads and memories he'd buried under gravel and regret. When he got there, the guard looked him up and down and said, "You're too late." Clayton was dead. At least, that's what they told him. And yet, as Franklin walked back to his truck, dazed and empty, a slip of paper tucked under the windshield made him stop cold. It was a receipt, from a bus station. Dated yesterday. One-way ticket. Destination scratched out. But the name printed at the top. Clayton Morrow. Something deep inside him snapped awake. Not rage. Not grief. It was hope. Twisted, raw, dangerous hope. Because if Clayton wasn't dead, then someone had lied. And Franklin Morrow was done building fences. The air in Franklin's lungs turned to cement as he stood in the middle of that sun-scorched prison parking lot, gripping the bus receipt like it was the last photograph of a ghost. The name on that ticket wasn't just familiar, it was impossible, like seeing your own death certificate marked, pending. Clayton Morrow had been declared deceased by the warden himself, and now, 24 hours later, his name showed up like a punchline no one wanted to hear. Franklin didn't go home. He drove 2 hours north to the nearest Greyhound terminal, parked in a lot full of pigeons and bad memories, and walked straight to the woman behind the counter who looked like she'd seen 1,000 faces and forgotten every one of them by sundown. He didn't smile. Didn't blink. Just laid the ticket stub down and asked her if she remembered the man who bought it. She narrowed her eyes like she was searching through fog, then reached under the counter and pulled out a ledger so thick it looked like it could tell stories if it wanted to. Her finger slid across the pages like it had muscle memory, then stopped. Paid in cash. Asked for a ticket south, didn't care where. Had a limp. Didn't talk much. Just stared. Franklin's hand trembled, but his voice didn't flinch. Did he look like he'd just crawled out of a war? She raised one eyebrow and gave him a look that landed somewhere between suspicion and sympathy. Sir, he looked like someone who hadn't been alive for years. Those words stuck in Franklin's ribs like shrapnel. So he did what a man like him always did when the trail went cold. He found the nearest bar, ordered black coffee, and sat in the corner until the world moved again. He hadn't believed in ghosts since Vietnam, but this felt different. Clayton hadn't escaped prison. Clayton had been let out. And if someone faked his death, they didn't do it out of mercy. They did it to bury something deeper than a corpse. That night, Franklin broke into the one place he swore he'd never return, the courthouse. He knew the back entrance, still remembered the broken latch on the basement door from his days as a county welder. It creaked like an old friend welcoming him back to a place of shame. He moved through the halls like smoke, found the archive room, and started digging through files that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Clayton's case file wasn't there. But something else was. A folder. Thick. Mismarked. Labeled Case Closed, Randall Lee. Now, Franklin hadn't heard that name in 30 years, but it hit him like a blowtorch to the chest. Randall Lee had been Clayton's best friend. Quiet boy. Lived 2 houses down. Kept pet snakes and read too many books for a kid who played with knives. The kind of kid who smiled too wide and never blinked enough. Franklin opened the file. And what he read stopped his heart cold. Photos. Surveillance. Letters. Psychiatric evaluations. Randall had been under observation since 1999. Diagnosed with something clinical and ugly. Flagged by the state as high risk. Linked to 2 violent incidents that had been buried under mutual combat reports. But what mattered most wasn't in the medical jargon. It was a single photo. Taken 4 days before the 4th of July attack. Randall. Standing behind Franklin's truck. Holding something that looked an awful lot like a jagged beer bottle. And next to him, Clayton. But not angry. Not wild-eyed. Terrified. Franklin leaned back, breathing hard. This wasn't just a missing piece of the puzzle. This was the puzzle itself, smashed, reassembled, and painted over with lies. Because if Randall had been involved that night, and the courts had known, then Clayton wasn't just guilty. He was a pawn. And somebody had been moving the pieces for a long, long time. The floor creaked behind him. Franklin spun, flashlight beam catching the face of a man he hadn't seen in decades. Sheriff Tom Whitaker. Gray now. Same smile. But the eyes were different, tired, haunted, watching. Still sneaking around in places you don't belong, Frank, the sheriff said, voice calm like a man petting a rattlesnake. Franklin stood. You buried it, Tom. You buried all of it. Tom nodded. No denial. No bluster. Just one sentence. Because if you knew the truth, you'd never sleep again. Then he turned and walked away, boots echoing like thunder across the courthouse floor. Franklin didn't call after him. Didn't chase. He just stared at that photo and realized something colder than death. Clayton hadn't been the one who failed him. He had been the one who didn't look close enough. And now, it was too late. Or so he thought. Until the motel phone rang. Room 12. Franklin answered. There was silence for a moment. Then a voice. Tired. Scarred. But unmistakable. Dad, it's me. The voice on the other end of the line sounded like it had been dragged through gravel and broken glass, but it was him. Franklin knew it deep in his bones, the way a man knows a storm is coming before the sky even turns black. For a full minute, he didn't speak, didn't breathe, didn't move, just stared into the motel room's darkness as if it might open up and swallow him whole. Clayton spoke again, softer this time. They said I died, Dad. But I didn't. Franklin's knuckles went white against the edge of the nightstand as every word carved a scar deeper than the last. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask why. He just whispered, where are you? There was a pause, filled with static and memories neither of them wanted to hold. Then Clayton said, there's a church. Out by Raven's Hollow. Meet me there. Midnight. Come alone. The line went dead. Franklin didn't pack. He didn't check out. He just grabbed his coat, checked the chamber of his revolver like muscle memory, and walked out into the night with the weight of 20 years pressing down on his shoulders like a coffin lid refusing to stay closed. The drive took 2 hours, maybe 3, it was hard to tell time when your mind's busy digging up every grave you ever swore you'd never visit again. Raven's Hollow was a ghost town, long since emptied after the mines collapsed back in '88, but the old church still stood like a wounded soldier refusing to die, its steeple leaning to one side, its windows shattered like the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He parked on the gravel shoulder and walked through the moonlight with the slow, measured steps of a man who's seen too many friends become enemies and too many sons become strangers. Inside, the air was thick with dust and regret, pews collapsed like broken ribs, and in the front, under a cross that hung sideways like it was ashamed, stood a figure in a coat 2 sizes too big, hood up, hands in pockets, head down. Franklin stepped forward. Clayton. The figure turned. And Franklin's heart stopped. It was him. Older, thinner, face carved with the kind of pain you don't get from years alone, you get it from knowing the truth and not being able to tell it. His eyes were bloodshot but clear. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the strain of carrying secrets too heavy for one man. I didn't kill you, Clayton said, voice hoarse. Not that night. Not ever. Franklin nodded. I know. I saw the file. Clayton's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. Moro men didn't cry. Not because they were strong, but because they didn't know how anymore. Clayton reached into his coat. Franklin's hand twitched toward his revolver. But all the boy pulled out was a photo. Crumpled. Faded. It showed 3 boys standing by a creek. Franklin recognized himself, 20 years younger, fishing pole in hand. Next to him, young Clayton. And beside them, smiling too wide for the camera, Randall Lee. He was there that night, Clayton said, voice cracking. He was the one who swung. I tried to stop him. He told me if I didn't keep my mouth shut, he'd kill you next. Franklin swallowed hard, the pieces clicking into place like the sound of a vault finally opening. Why didn't you tell the court? Clayton looked up, and for the first time in 2 decades, Franklin saw the boy he remembered, not the man he feared. I did. Those words didn't just hang in the air, they exploded like gunfire. Clayton stepped forward. They said I was delusional. Said I was protecting him because we were friends. But he wasn't my friend, Dad. He was controlling me. For years. Franklin sat down in the first unbroken pew, the weight of it all hitting him like a freight train made of guilt, missed birthdays, and unanswered letters. He whispered, "Randall disappeared right after the trial." Clayton nodded slowly. They relocated him. New name. New life. They said he needed protection. Said he was the victim. Franklin's jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked stone. Then Clayton said something that nearly made the old man fall over. "He's still in town." Franklin looked up, eyes wide. "Where?" Clayton's voice turned into a whisper so sharp it cut the air clean. "He's Sheriff Whitaker." The silence that followed was the kind that rots your soul. Franklin stood, fists clenched, the weight of betrayal heavier than any war, any scar, any night he'd ever endured. That man, had come into his home, eaten his food, held his grandson in his arms, all while hiding the truth behind a badge and a smile that meant nothing. Clayton stepped back, his voice breaking. "I came to say goodbye, Dad. I've been hiding for years. But I had to see you once, had to tell you." Franklin grabbed him by the shoulders. "You're not leaving again. We're going to the state, the press, anyone who'll listen." But Clayton shook his head. "They won't believe me. They already didn't. And Whitaker's protected. They'll bury me all over again." Franklin let go. Stepped back. Looked up at that crooked cross, then down at the boy who should have never had to become a fugitive just to survive. "You're wrong about one thing, son." Clayton raised his eyes. Franklin's voice turned to gravel. "They buried you once. They won't get the chance again." Then a gunshot cracked through the stained glass like thunder. And Franklin fell. Blood on the floor. Clayton screaming his name. And in the doorway, shadowed, silent, still smoking pistol in hand, stood Sheriff Whitaker. The bullet struck low, left side, just beneath the ribcage, and for a moment, time stopped as Franklin Morrow staggered back, clutching his gut like he was trying to hold in not just his blood but every mistake he'd ever made. He collapsed across the aisle, the wooden floor beneath him cold and stained from decades of dust and sorrow, and all around him, the old church trembled with the weight of one man's reckoning. Clayton screamed his father's name like it might reverse time, like sheer force of will could push that bullet out and bring the years back with it. But Franklin didn't scream. He just gritted his teeth, eyes locked on the silhouette in the doorway, the man who wore the devil's grin behind a good man's badge. Sheriff Whitaker stepped forward, calm as Sunday service, gun still raised, no hurry in his step, as if killing a Morrow was just a thing he'd planned to check off his list before breakfast. The moonlight spilled through the broken stained glass, painting red and gold across his face like judgment had finally arrived to collect its debt. "You should have stayed quiet, Frank," the sheriff said, voice steady, almost kind, like he was putting a dog to sleep. "You had a peaceful life. Could have died not knowing. Could have spared yourself this." Clayton stood over his father's body now, trembling with rage, eyes wild, hands empty but ready to tear the world down if it meant protecting the one man who, despite everything, had come for him. "You lied," he said, voice shaking like a rattlesnake's tail. "You framed me. You watched him suffer." Sheriff Whitaker chuckled, a low, bitter sound with no joy in it, just long simmering rot. "Framed you? Son, you handed me the knife. All I did was point the crowd in the direction they were already running." He raised the pistol again. But Franklin, bleeding, half-conscious, teeth red with blood, laughed. It wasn't a madman's laugh. It was something darker. Something older. "You made one mistake, Tom," he said, his voice ragged, each word carrying the weight of a coffin. Whitaker tilted his head, amused. "And what's that?" Franklin's eyes burned like wildfire. "You didn't kill me first. And from the shadowed corner behind the pulpit, unseen, unmoving, unnoticed until that moment, came the click of a hammer being cocked. The shot rang out like Judgment Day. Whitaker spun, staggered, then dropped his pistol, falling to his knees like a man suddenly remembering every lie he ever told. A second shot followed, clean, precise, cutting through the silence and sending the sheriff face first into the dust, his blood joining Franklin's in the place once meant for communion. Clayton turned, wide-eyed, heart thundering like a drum. And there she stood. Evelyn Morrow. Franklin's daughter. Clayton's sister. Gone for 16 years, declared missing after a fight no one could remember the words to, now standing like a ghost in denim and leather, her father's old rifle cradled in her arms like an angel of vengeance sent to even the scales. "Didn't think I'd miss the show," she said, stepping down the aisle with boots heavy as justice. Clayton stared like he'd seen Lazarus walk in from the grave. "You're alive." She nodded, face hard as granite. "Been hiding. Off-grid. Watching. Waiting. I knew Whitaker had dirt. Didn't know how deep it ran. I came back when I heard about the fire. Figured it wasn't random. Figured it was time." Franklin groaned, coughing hard, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth like the last leak from a sinking ship. Evelyn dropped beside him, pulling fabric from her coat, pressing it against the wound with hands that didn't shake. "You're not dying, old man. Not like this." But Franklin's hand caught hers, firm despite the pain. "Listen to me," he rasped. "There's more. The truth. It's not just about Randall. It's not just about me." Clayton leaned in, eyes desperate. "What truth?" Franklin looked at both of them, his children, his legacy, the last two pieces of a puzzle scattered by war, time, and betrayal. "Your mother," he whispered. "She never died in that crash. She ran. She was running from him. From Whitaker. He was blackmailing her. For years. That crash. It was faked. Paid for. Sealed by the court." Clayton's knees gave out. Evelyn dropped the cloth. The church went still again, the kind of stillness that comes only after revelation, when the lies collapse and all you're left with is ruin. Franklin closed his eyes, a single tear tracing down through the dust and blood. "She's alive," he said, voice nearly gone. "And I know where." Clayton grabbed his hand. "We'll find her." Franklin smiled, just barely. "You better." And then he passed out. But he didn't die. Because the grave that waited for Franklin Morrow would have to wait a little longer. The morning sun rose slow and blood-orange, spilling over the broken windows of that ruined church like it had come to bear witness to what night had tried to hide. Outside, two old trucks sat silent in the gravel, engines still warm, soaked in dew and silence. Inside, Franklin Morrow lay unconscious but breathing, wrapped in his daughter's coat, chest rising shallow but steady like a man stubbornly refusing to go when death had finally come calling. Clayton stood by the altar, staring at the shattered stained glass as if it could somehow answer the question rattling inside his chest like a loose bullet in a chamber: why would she run? Why leave us behind? Evelyn moved through the room like a ghost still deciding if she belonged among the living. She crouched by her father, hands bloodied, but not from panic, no, from purpose. She had seen enough wounds in her years off-grid to know Franklin wasn't finished yet, just exhausted. Broken men didn't die easy, especially not ones with truth still left to tell. "You believe him?" Clayton asked, voice hoarse, eyes locked on nothing. "I do," Evelyn said without hesitation. "He never lied to me. Not once. He just stopped telling the truth when it got too heavy to carry." They buried Whitaker under the floorboards of the church. No prayers. No ceremony. Just two shovels and a silence deeper than any sermon could touch. No one was ever going to come looking for him, not in a town that had forgotten its own name. Not for a man who wore justice like a costume and buried his sins behind a badge. That afternoon, Franklin woke. It was raining lightly outside, the soft kind of rain that smells like earth and memory. His eyes blinked open, and for a moment, he looked at Clayton and Evelyn like he was back in another time, another life, before the fire, before the fences. Then his voice came, low and slow. Her name's not Margaret anymore. She's living under Grace Holloway. In Missouri. Small town. Changed everything. Thought we were safer if she disappeared. Clayton felt like the ground shifted beneath him, like the world had tilted sideways and never bothered to right itself. You knew. Franklin nodded slowly, pain twisting his features. Found out 2 years ago. Private letter. Postmarked from nowhere. She told me she never meant to stay gone. She just didn't know how to come back. Evelyn pulled the map from her coat, unfolded it on the floor like a general planning one last battle. Then we're going, she said, her voice sharp, final, and unshakable. All of us. Today. Franklin tried to rise, and when he couldn't, Clayton knelt and lifted him like a soldier carrying his commanding officer from the field for the last time. They drove west. 3 broken people in one battered truck, each with scars the road couldn't see, chasing the last living piece of their past through the heartland. The miles rolled beneath them, and with each passing field and fading sun, something in Franklin's chest started to unclench. In a town called Chapel Ridge, 1 post office, 2 gas stations, and a diner that still used handwritten menus, they found her. She was older now. Still tall. Still fierce-eyed. Her hair was white as snow, pulled back in a braid that looked like it had been woven through 1,000 sleepless nights. She was setting out coffee cups at the counter when the bell above the door rang and time folded in on itself. Franklin stepped in first, one arm across Clayton's shoulder, the other gripping the cane he'd insisted he didn't need. She looked up. And when their eyes met, the world stopped turning. She whispered one word. Frank. And then she ran to him. No drama. No speeches. Just arms wrapped around him like they'd never let go again, tears falling without permission, without shame. Clayton stood frozen in the doorway, breath caught, heart pounding like it had forgotten what peace looked like. Margaret turned, her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide as she saw the boy she'd left behind standing there as a man. She stepped toward him slowly, trembling, like every movement might collapse the fragile thing between them. I never stopped loving you, she said. He didn't speak. He just fell into her arms. And for the first time in over 20 years, the Morrow family stood whole again. But the story didn't end there. Because 3 weeks later, just when the dust had settled and peace seemed possible, Franklin got a letter. No return address. Just one line, scrawled in handwriting he hadn't seen in decades. Randall Lee never died. The room went quiet. Evelyn took the letter, scanned it, eyes narrowing with a fury that had never left her since the day she vanished. We killed Whitaker, she said. But he wasn't working alone. Franklin leaned back in his chair, the fire reigniting behind his eyes. Clayton stood, fists clenched. Margaret reached for the old family photo on the mantel and turned it face down. Because some ghosts don't stay buried. Some fences never fall. And some wars, no matter how many years pass, never truly end. Write in the comments where you're from, let's see how far these stories can spread. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new exciting stories. See you soon.